Thanks for joining us on the Product for People podcast. Today we're joined by Joel Worrall, who's the Chief Product Officer at the BibleProject, which is a nonprofit organization. Joel previously ran the front-end engineering team at Stripe, as well as opened and ran the open source program office at New Relic. So he's got strong experience in both the engineering side of things, as well as the product side of things for both commercial and nonprofit organizations. Today, we're going to cover topics such as core values and how those affect product decisions, the idea of making small bets versus large-scale products choices, and then the idea of scaling your organization's reach without actually scaling your organization. I think you're going to find it very interesting.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Thank you, Jeremy and Joshua, for having me.
Yeah, of course. For those that are not familiar with BibleProject, would you mind explaining what that is and maybe beyond what it is, the reach in which BibleProject reaches an audience? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, BibleProject is a crowd-funded nonprofit organization. We think of ourselves as like an animation studio and a media technology company. Like we're an educational company in the sense of like we're producing content. Like, so we have a YouTube channel, a podcast, and then a number of like online products that are all focused on helping people engage with the story that we believe exists like throughout the Bible, and helping people see repeated patterns and themes, and get some real overview of like what it is that they're reading. And obviously, there's a lot of people that are interested in doing that, and so for us, let's see, reach-wise, last time I knew, we were the largest ad-free channel on YouTube.
Wait, say that again. You're the largest ad-free channel on YouTube?
Correct.
Is that what you said?
There's no ads on our videos. And last year, I believe we had like 110 million views on YouTube. About half of those were from outside of the United States. We've got north of 1 million people that are listening to the podcast on a weekly basis. And what we do is like we're constantly publishing these on these media platforms, say short form videos that are animated, that will describe some part of the Bible or help people get a handle on like how to read a section of the Bible. And then alongside all of that, we have an entire product engineering organization inside BibleProject that's focused on an app, a website, and then another product that we have called Classroom, that are all meant to feed into this like larger, deeper and deeper experience of like trying to understand the text in the way that we believe it was originally constructed.
Who is your audience? Because with the Bible being so broad and so, what it is, who do you think your audience is?
Yeah, well, obviously, because everything we make, we give away for free. Anybody is like potentially our audience.
Sure.
But as the head of product, when we're talking about like the primary user that we're serving, particularly with our platforms. So I'd say like, if you talk about like what we publish in TikTok or, what might be on YouTube, those demographics are going to like change in terms of like who the primary audience is going to end up being. When it comes to our products, we sort of think about we're primarily interacting with people who've identified as a Christian for probably more than 10 years, who are trying to figure out how to read the Bible because they think that that's a thing that they should probably want to do. Secretly, they don't really like reading the Bible that much. They especially don't like the Old Testament.
You're speaking to the choir here, my friend.
Yeah. And they don't have any place, even though they may be a part of a faith community, they don't have any place to like bring really complex questions that feel like maybe you're not supposed to ask. And so we end up being sort of like a safe space to explore some of those ideas and draw connections on parts of the Bible that might feel like they're like, you're not sure what to do with them. How am I as a thinking modern person who, believes that science is real? How do I connect that to what I'm reading in this text and what's the point of it? So,
and I think the last conversation you and I had, we talked a little bit about how that impacts how you approach product, and product being what I'm thinking about is the app, website, and the classroom stuff, and how you're approaching that to the larger audience. Do you want to touch on that for a minute? Do you want to kind of touch on what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, like I said, we remind our audience, all the time that everything we make, we give away for free because someone else already paid for it. And so that open-handedness about our stuff, like we kind of recognize, like, we don't own this. The project is a thing that like we're all owning. And so, of course, like there's something like core and like we're giving away a service for free. So we're giving away something that I think many people would argue they'd be willing to pay for, like for free. So that's part of it. But also when we think about like the platforms we're building, we've got over the next few years objective to put ourselves in a position to either open source more of our own software or, in the case of our service layer, partners that are on kind of like the same general mission as us, but maybe serving like a totally different audience that isn't really central to the people that like perhaps like might resonate with our content. We want to make that our library available to all those people so that they can do something with that content as well. So that idea of like embracing open strategies is actually part of like our core principles. And actually it's going to be one of the key things we focus on in 24 and 25.
Cool. I have a real quick question about one of your core values. You use the word unhurried.
Yeah.
I've never heard that word, and it's a core value anywhere in all my work in tech. I can't imagine a tech company just saying, "Hey, don't worry about it, guys. Let's unhurry ourselves." That doesn't sound like a normal organizational guidance. Can you illuminate us a bit on how that exists and what effect that has on how you guys produce things?
Everything we're really trying to live out like the principles we feel like are at the heart of the story of the Bible. And one of them is this idea that like life was meant to be lived in rhythms of rest and work. And if we're in a constant state of motion and don't provide ourselves opportunity to rest, we think we're not really fully being human. And so it's funny because unhurried is the most confused, even internally. It's like you could easily weaponize it to be like, oh, deadlines don't matter.
I'll get it to you Tuesday.
Right. That's not what we're talking about. Well, we've used the analogy sometimes internally, like, are you swimming hard or are you drowning? Right. But like we're meant to work, right? We're built for work. And we're also built for rest. And so we want to make sure as an organization that we're embracing those things. Now, what we're actually doing is embracing synchronized rest as an organization where like there are 4 weeks a year where everybody in the company is off.
Interesting.
And we have flex time too, but we're actually trying to like embrace this because we recognize rest isn't really that restful when you're on vacation and everybody else is working. And so like, how do we create times for us to like refill ourselves so that we can go hard at the problems that we are really passionate about in the hours that we are working?
So it's interesting. It's interesting you phrase it that way because you're right. The word unhurried could be read very different ways. But what you just highlighted in terms of organizational intent or purpose about, hey, let's take a week off together, let's rest, let's have the same schedule, let's swim hard together. That's actually, I could see that translating over to many organizations where this concept of like, we are people, you have value as a person, we want to work hard together, but we also want to be sane. And I think that's where many companies have evolved too, and it's great to hear that you guys have some experience there.
Yeah. And I'll push into that too.
Oh, sorry.
I'll just say purposeful work and purposeful rest. Like there's like that division. And I love that.
Right. And I would say one of the other things that's central to it as well is like we recognize like we're not just like chasing the next click. Most of the things we're building like are meant to last in the extent that anything lasts on the internet. Right. And so we want to be really intentional to like recognize like the deadline does matter, right? But also doing what's wise, like in the moment, matters too. There are some scenarios of like moving the deadline just does make sense, right? Now, I am like a ship person, right? I want to see us like land everything. But ultimately, what I want to do is like invite us all to like make a wise choice. And sometimes it's going to mean to like stop for a moment and figure out like what's best, what's the right next thing to do, and how do we like try to find a way to like achieve the outcome we want in a way that doesn't violate all of our values, including unhurried.
You talked a little bit about this kind of built for last idea. I think the word longevity has come up before. And as I think about how many organizations build products or deliver services, there's always this balance of like, what do we ship? There's this feature backlog or whatever backlog it is, and there's competing interests. I have sales teams saying this, I've got customers saying this, I got bug reports saying this, I've got code maintenance that needs this, I've got security concerns that need this, and there's all this balancing. Use the word longevity. I don't recall longevity and this kind of idea of long-term longevity being a factor too often in other product teams. How does it impact how you guys think and build product?
Well, a great example, like we're about to ship an experience, like starting next year, a new concept around like how to increase weekly engagement, which is like just a simple concept of a playlist, right? Mm-hmm. And in some respects, like you could say like, well, that's just this like ephemeral experience that like it's here and gone like after the next week. But we're also always thinking about the idea that like everything we're making as a library, people are going to be coming back to that experience in the future. And how are we investing in like both like the engineering maintainability as well as like the ergonomics of the user experience, like to make it possible for you to like recall something that like was impactful for you the next time you want to come back to it. And so I think like part of what it is like balancing the tension of like, we have launches of things like we ship videos, we ship products, and those things matter. We're also trying to like pay attention to the idea that like someone's going to come and encounter this thing after we produce this entire series a year of content. Someone 5 years from now, we hope, is going to come back into it as well. And how are we thinking about the experience that person's going to have
right.
in terms of like discoverability?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And one other topic or one other internal guideline that has come up, or I've heard about, is this idea of you're expanding your audience, and the project is growing, the number of users or viewers are increasing, but your org size is not. Can you touch on that briefly? Can you first of all set the stage? How large is your actual product org size, and then why won't it grow? Why isn't it growing?
Yeah. It's an awesome question. Thank you. So we're about 40 people. So the entire engineering product design group is about 40 humans, mostly remote, like mostly across the United States and Canada. And one of the principles that we try to adhere to is this idea of like focusing on simplicity, not necessarily something that's easy. And some of that's about the idea of like maintainability. So when we're building features, when we're building roadmaps, when we're picking libraries in terms of engineering tools, we're trying to give a perspective that says, what's a thing that I can build that I don't have to leave someone behind to just babysit? And that's a really challenging engineering and product problem.
Absolutely.
Provide something of value that doesn't feel like, we have an on-call rotation, and we've got the right observability tooling in place, all those sorts of things. And we have incidents that occur occasionally, but mostly what we're really trying to do is engineer, make one of the constraints the size of the team that we are and pretty much want to stay at. And so that might mean to accomplish a particular, customer felt need, the approach that we're going to take, we're always dealing with this reality of we're not waiting for our Series A to come in and all of a sudden we're going to grow up to 200 engineers, and we wouldn't want to be that size to start off with, right? We're going to figure out how to solve a problem with 4 people, right? And so that is as much of an engineering constraint as anything, actually just to even scope problems that way. And you can push yourself. Obviously engineers often want to point out limitations, right? But there's another thing we're calling you into, which is do your better work. And the better work might look like discovering how to solve a problem in a way that you hadn't imagined before. That's actually simpler. And that might mean like not using an entire library that like everyone's using like for, building your static content just because everyone does that, because actually the maintenance costs on the thing on the backside are going to just like eat your lunch from now till the moment that the project ends, right? And maybe we should home grow something at one particular point. Like there are pieces that it just makes sense to do that for.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounds like a bunch of these things affect your backlog, your workflow. It's very interesting. So I want to kind of bring it home a little bit with this topic. You've got all these uniquenesses about your organization that affect your backlog maintenance, how you pick things, how you build things, how you ship things. And they make complete sense within the Bible Project, within your organization, your audience, what you guys are attempting to do. And I'm curious about what your take is if you were to pull yourself out of that and put yourself in a commercial situation like New Relic or Stripe or some of your experience or some of our experience, my experiences, etc. What of these things would translate well? Because some would be a little bit weird, but what are some of these internal guidelines like longevity or unhurriedness or fill in the blank? Some of these things we just talked about. How would they translate to a commercial organization, or how could they translate to a commercial organization?
Well, I mean, I'd just say some of my previous experiences, actually the constraint that of staffing. I mean, it's there, like no matter how large the organization is, right? It's hard to fill roles. And so there is this like mixture of like the engineering and product sensibility of discovering like through user research, obviously often like starting with like an intuition yourself that you're like counterbalancing with external data on like what the simplest, most effective bet you can make on like what people are going to need in order to solve a problem. That problem probably can be solved by a small team. And you're probably more likely to pivot sooner. And so I always shy away from like really large, like expansive projects. They make us feel good, but like they rarely are particularly effective. And instead try to construct even the way the teams put together for agility, right? So in our context, like we operate in a cross-functional squad model, like because we want to make sure that like all the humans that are a part of this thing are just like accountable to one another on the delivery of things. And I'd say definitely that's a principle I'd absolutely pull into any sort of organization, to just, not let people hide and like empower them, but also like scope problems in a way that like a small team can address them.
It sounds kind of lean startup-y in some regard.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
great.
Maybe on that front, if you wouldn't mind talking through the roadmap, your roadmap, and even how you discover your roadmap or what gets on that roadmap. Because, like you're saying, a lead group, very just concise group, which means maybe some larger initiatives are more challenging, or they might have to be bite-sized things inside of that initiative. Would you mind talking through a little bit of how you approach your roadmap and maybe what's on there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our roadmap's a part of like the overall strategic planning in the organization. And so it rolls out of like top level goals that are delivered on an annual basis from the org that tends to actually now focus around like one driving rally cry for the organization. This last year, one of the things that had happened was the first year ever that the year before we had technically had more viewership on YouTube than that year. And so we wanted to like reverse that trend and get back into the place where we were delivering more content and introducing ourselves to like more of the audience. And so that became like a major driver and also a focusing point for even like where things landed in the product roadmap. We also have a longer term view, which is like we sort of think about these like 7-year cycles of the way the organization functions. So you could set some larger vision about a large initiative you might want to do. Like for instance, I'll answer your question in a second, but like trying to give an example here of like, we want to get to a place that like we feel like we are freely giving away all our code content and our engineering culture by the time we reach 2028. And we know we're going to get it done way sooner than that, right? But we don't have to get there in 24. So there's steps that, like in that case, like we can lay some groundwork on that is sort of like a larger initiative. We launched a couple years ago, like our entire infrastructure moved to federated GraphQL as our backend service, and we knew we weren't going to get that all done in 1 year. But what we did is like recognize the North Star looks like that. And so how do we find alignment between what we want to do with Classroom and what's going to help us make advancement on an underlying piece of infrastructure that's going to like get us to where we ultimately want to go? We use the Amazon six-pager model for like how we do annual planning, and then like and offer each other like lots of feedback on that, setting goals, right? And are constantly like retargeting, on an annual basis, try to stick with things for a year. And then honestly, like because we've got clarity on what the goals are, what it is or doesn't fit in on the backlog becomes a lot more apparent. Like for instance, this year, simplicity versus easy, focusing on our content connected to scripture, and then starting to adopt open strategies are 3 big ideas that like I know we're going to carry into our annual planning process. And so it tends to make it a little bit easier. Like there are some like obvious things, like we got to get to the end of shipping Classroom 2.0. And so that just has to land on the roadmap. But then there are other components of, like, say, in the app strategy, where what we're going to determine is actually more driven by like those higher level values, because we've got lots of ideas about things that we think could be valuable. But if we're going to commit to the idea that these 3 ideas are really going to matter for us, we're going to see everything through that lens, and then as best as we can, like land out like sprint by sprint, quarter over quarter, what the delivery is going to be for the year.
That's interesting. Having been someone that has also dealt with more strategic view and quarter to quarter and sprint by sprint type priorities, how do you prioritize those things against each other? Like you just said that the lens drives everything, but yet there are some things like this bug happened, and and I'll speak for myself, saying those things can tend to take over. And certainly have for me in the past, where it's like, oh, geez, I need to deal with this 100 things that are coming in, because they're definitely priorities because users are complaining about them or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you balance that versus this vision of open source, like you mentioned?
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe I'll give a good example from like a challenge we faced this year. Our web squad throughout the year, like just velocity wise, with like maintenance, technical debt, we're just under delivering. That's not a commentary on like the humans that were involved in it. I mean,
sure,
there were all areas that people could do better, but also the systems weren't like structured well. And
Isn't that like every product team ever?
Right. So we just kept sort of plowing through for the first several months.
Yeah.
We had to hit some spot where like we had to say, we have to stop. We collected, like, we actually paused a couple things in order to like make a big investment on the next gen architecture and try to figure out a way to like not have to go all the way in on it. And so, yeah, that wrecked my roadmap for like some stuff that I was planning on doing that year. Now, ironically, like we actually are delivering on most of the top level metrics that we wanted to deliver on for the year. But there was a secondary one that really was about like getting further on self-service and like our ability to move quicker. And it was just never going to get there without this like additional investment. And so I guess like what we end up doing often is like waiting till the pain of change is so great, like that it just makes sense to like change strategy and like and move to like what you know is going to be a better decision in the long run, but like might cost you in the near term.
Is there some factor that led to that knowledge too? So you're working, all of a sudden the pain builds up to this point, and then we address it. Like, is there some guidance you can give to other organizations to figure out when to make that call?
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes just like sprint metrics are not the only thing to pay attention to, but like if you're just constant do versus say is not hitting 1-to-1, like you've got some signal there. And then as we started digging into like the personnel of the group, there's just a reality that like it wasn't like we not only were we not delivering on deadlines, we were still finding it's far too complicated to work with each other. I sat through like a deployment process and realized there's 100% certainty that there's going to be a problem in this process. So there was investigation that was kind of triggered by metrics that finally led us to the point that we were like, we can keep going down this path, but it's not going to get us any further. We're still going to be like very stuck. So now's the time to like make a harder choice. And it wasn't totally popular internally. I mean, it was a really complicated choice to have to make because, we had to say no to some people on some things that like they were counting on. So that required lots of work on alignment and, and conversation all the way up the ladder of the executive team.
Similar to that line of questioning that Josh had, your users, you have a very interesting kind of thing going on, which is volume. You do have volume and some level, which is not normal for a lot of nonprofits. Mm-hmm. Then you also have a nonprofit angle of, maybe something else like internally or maybe qualitative type mm-hmm. approach. How, kind of digging one layer deeper into what you just said, how do you understand there should be a shift? This isn't working, or this is where we should go and try something new. Like, how do you discover that? Yeah. And maybe shift if there's something there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things, it's funny, like our relationship with our audience, I think it is, I'll say for me, it's like unique in the types of models that I've seen, even in amongst nonprofits. So we're not like driven chasing the next dollar. Right. And we also use financial contribution as a signal into the organization about how much the work we're doing is resonating with the audience. And so I could point to like something like our hospitality team, which spends a lot of like energy and time just talking with our patrons, or the work that we do in user research. And so there are some points where like the recognition that like we don't own this work, we're doing it for our audience, and we need to listen to them, can be a big enough driver for us to decide to like do something just because we know it's going to be best for them. So I guess like that is like one of the like very real, tangible, like listening and talking to people. We get tons of comments, and then going the next layer into like really doing real user interviews has done a lot to like help us understand when something like really matters to the audience, and therefore like we need to be really thoughtful about it. We're not just being driven by that, but that's one of the signals that we're trying to pay attention to.
Did I hear you say that you kind of would adjust what you're building based upon what you're hearing from your audience? Is that basically?
Yeah, I think we're building with our audience, but I think there can be some scenarios like Jeremy, you mentioned the idea of like the bug that's really like, hurting like our give flow or something, right?
Sure.
So like our
right, like, P1, whatever. Yeah.
Right. This isn't about necessarily like, sure. Closing the next dollar. But we do have an internal perspective that like we need to maintain a wide open front door, and that it's not generous of us to like not be in a position where when someone does decide they want to be a part of the project, that they like find it frustrating or difficult, right? And so like, of course, that's got to take priority. In general, of course, we're trying to build and test things in a way that like we're not spending a lot of energy on that. But I think like that can be a signal for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I think too, like I think back 2 years ago, we ran this year-long journey reading through like the first 5 books of the Bible, and there's some content in there that is not exactly the people's favorite like way to engage that text. I love it, but that's because of my background. And we had to listen. Like we recognized we launched out with like a really significant initiative that had just frankly too much content in it. And so we had huge drop off. We're seeing the metrics where like people are saying they're really interested. They're still tracking with the podcast, but they're not doing this experience that we're delivering on the app, or they're falling off somewhere. And like, we want to be thoughtful about like, okay, like the learning from that. We're not just going to keep throwing, good money after bad, like continuing to like try to build features on that. But obviously like we're listening to our audience there.
Well, Joel, based upon all the things you've said and kind of like myself, from myself as a product guy, I would love to hear your take on advice for somebody that is wanting to get into product, wanting to get into what you're doing, but really kind of this chief product officer territory and the things that you've learned. What advice would you give to someone like myself or others that are trying to get into this space?
Yeah. Well, I can only offer advice from like my own like journey and context. And I'd say like I've floated throughout my career between product and engineering roles and found the process of like leading on a product front so much more light and viable because I have like a lot of clarity on the engineering front. And so I think bringing, even if you don't come from that background, like understanding how to do more than drive the car, but like how the car actually works, I think is really important. And then the second thing I'd say is I spent a lot of time sort of floating back and forth between IC roles and leadership roles throughout my career. And I feel like that process of like learning how to lead through influence and not necessarily authority was incredibly important to getting to a place where, I mean, in the ideal scenario, when you get made someone's boss, they should be glad that was the case. And of course, that doesn't always happen, right? But like, how do you build in the kind of like capability to like influence people, even if they're not working for you, in such a way that like you can be the boss that you wish you had, right? And that doesn't just mean nice, like it also means being willing to like say hard things to one another, but also feeling like you're supported. So I guess the encouragement I'd offer is like learn how to steward influence, ship really great work and like hone your instincts. And then don't be afraid of the engineering work because they're gonna do what you ask more often when you understand how it actually works. So, yeah.
That's great. Joel, thank you so much for joining us here in the podcast. We really appreciate this and the conversation we had today.
I really appreciate the invitation. It's been great to talk with you guys.
Yeah, same.
Thanks, Joel.
Well, thanks, Joel.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate it if you could leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help spread the word. Our podcast is produced and designed by Jeremy and Joshua Wold. You can find our show archive and transcripts at productsforpeoplepodcast.com. We look forward to seeing you for our next episode, and in the meantime, we hope you experience some really great products. Thanks.